Hi there, welcome back to the Wandering podcast, where we talk about anything and everything. And I can't remember the tagline and the rest. Recovery and the rest.
Sobriety and the rest.
That's good for episode 2, isn't it? Um, so today we're going to talk about Ellen and Ellen's relationship to recovery, I guess, and your story of, how and why you got to where you are and all the strengths you've learned along the way through those things. So, where do you want to start? How old do you want to start? I mean, I guess it's like are we focusing this around alcohol and kind of that?
Yeah, I was thinking about this during the week of where do you start with it? Because I think there's a lot, my relationship with alcohol started just so early, right? And after reflecting on our conversation from last week of how I view my relationship with alcohol now as to when I viewed it when I gave up alcohol, um, is is interesting. It might not be to anybody else, but it is interesting for me reflecting back on it. But yeah, I suppose my relationship with alcohol started super, super early. And I was one of those, well, we both were, those 90s teenage children. But even before that, I was one of those babies that was, given watered down wine in very middle class England. Like alcohol, if my parents gave it to me in a fashion like that, then it wasn't going to be any secret and that I
Mm.
would have a good relationship with it. Um, I don't think that's particularly what I was modeled though with alcohol. And it's certainly during the 90s in the UK we were targeted, right, as teenage girls, I think.
Yeah, I was on a meeting the other day and someone said, and then she was telling her story and she was like, and then I worked for this, she was American, this British company. And I mean, all British people are alcoholics. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh, wait, maybe we are. Um, what did it give you or what didn't it give you right back at the beginning? Like, did you have an instantaneous kind of relationship with it or, yeah, I'm interested what those kind of first experiences were.
So I think we kind of touched on it last week of the interesting thing with recovery is looking in hindsight about whether alcohol was like my first addiction. And I know Russell Brand's very Marmite and he's got his issues, but when I read his book, I remember him talking about food being his first kind of escape. And I know that food for me was a big thing. I just loved it, right? Like, and from a very early age, whatever I loved, I wanted to do to excess, whether that was eating or drinking. But I remember age 12, and I remember it so vividly. My parents had put the plastic bottles of Strongbow, like a liter bottle in the freezer, and it was frozen like a
Mm.
slushy. And I remember guzzling it like in secret because it just tasted so good. And it was that I don't know what it gave me. It just gave me pleasure and I wanted more of it from a very early age. And yeah, from the peach schnapps and lemonade to the ciders, the port and lemonade, anything that was sweet, and then the Smirnoff ices, the
Mm.
everything just it was good fun. And I think I associated it strongly with good fun because I used to listen to my parents like getting drunk, having barbecues, playing music, and it just sounded so convivial. Like, oh,
Mm.
this is what adults do. Um, and so it wasn't when I talk to other people and there's a lot of numbing out, that it wasn't the numbing out, it was the seeking the like this is good and I want more of it from a
Mm.
very early age.
Yeah, and I think like it's really helpful to understand that because I think those are the hardest drivers when you're sort of stopping to, to redefine or whatever, when it's, what was that first thing that you connected with? Because our brain is essentially gets stuck or trapped in that kind of memory association with it. So, to have that memory association with fun or connection or whatever it is. Um, I was just thinking about cider. They used to sell cider lollies in my local ice cream factory, and I used to, yeah, that was my that was my
You're
wonderful
doing.
choice. Yeah, as a
Yeah.
small child, I'll have a cider lolly, please.
Yeah.
Which I don't think anyone ever. I mean, I don't know whether they still make them, but and they really did taste of cider. I mean, it didn't just taste of apple juice. It's curious, isn't it? So how did things progress then? So through your kind of, yeah, your teenage years and into your 20s.
Well, I mean, like you, I got two older brothers. I always wonder whether that's a kind of a factor in the way that I eat, in the way that I behave. Is quite a kind of competitive way in a certain kind of factor of it. And I went to engineering college, and I was the only girl in engineering college. And there was some kind of, yeah, competitive, ego-driven drinking there. It was fun, but I was always out to prove that I could drink more than the boys. Always, always. Like I was, I loved engineering, but I didn't want to be the nerdy girl. Again, I associated drinking as with people who were really cool, really good fun, and I wanted to be that person. And so always it was. I loved the community. Like I think this is something when we go long-term sobriety, it would be so much easier if we hated alcohol, right? And I do to a certain extent, and we'll get back to that later. There are parts of me that hate alcohol. There was also parts that I really loved, and for me in the UK we have pubs, and in France we have the cafes, and but I loved that pub culture. There was something that especially in the 90s and in 96 there was the football, it was a great time with the music um and I did really love that pub community. It was like this sense of community, and I think that's what I was seeking, was to be able to go into somewhere, be comfortable there. And that was what my weekends, my long week, oh yeah, from Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday looked like. 16, 17,
Yeah.
18. um
Super Cider Sunday, we used to call it.
yeah, and like Sunday closing time at 10:30, my goodness, like, okay, I better get four drinks now when they ring
Yeah.
the nobody ever said to me that I had any issues with alcohol right there, and I was drinking more or less the same as those around me. Whether I sought those people out or not, I don't know. Um, but yeah, there was definitely an ego-driven side to it as well.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'd never considered that kind of ego side of it, that there's some, I mean, I know it was tied up with kind of weirdly tied up with feminism in the 90s of that kind of ladette
Yeah.
movement, but to see it as some sort of a way of proving yourself is quite interesting. I hadn't thought of it like that. Um, and so you moved to France at some point.
Yeah, so 17, I actually met my husband, and at that point we were drinking in the UK, it was like three bottles of Blossom Hill for 10 quid.
Yeah.
We were drinking three bottles between us every night from the age of like 19 to 21, more or less every night. But I was working in the gym, right? I was a personal trainer, I was a manager in the gym, very young age. I was really quite fit. I was absolutely functioning. I was getting up at 6, um, running the gym, and I was working out. I was doing all the things, super into nutrition. I put myself through college, and again, just interesting because I was into that well-being. I lost my dad when I was 19, and he had a really complicated relationship with alcohol. Um, Very much self-medicating a depression through alcohol. And now I can look at it with a real kind of compassionate lens for him of how and why he did that. But lots of memories tied into, yes, I got that association that it was fun for my parents, but when things were really difficult, it was alcohol that he leaned on. Um, so yeah, I was totally functioning. Everything was great. It was great fun. And then I started smoking weed, and alcohol kind of took a back seat. And I smoked weed to excess. Um, because why not? One joint was great, but 10 was even better. And then we moved to France when I was 27 and stopped smoking weed, like because we couldn't get it. And I kind of thought this is a really good opportunity not to continue with that habit. So I was really pleased to put that down. But with coming to France, it'll be interesting to hear your story next
Mm.
week. But it's like that ladette binge drinking culture met the continental Europe culture of daily drinking. And that's what it turned into. It was actually daily drinking plus the binges. And with weed out of the way, it was okay, well, I'll have a couple of beers every day, I'll have a couple of glasses of wine, and then I had my daughter, and then another daughter, and then my son. And although I stopped drinking during my first two pregnancies, I didn't quite stop drinking during my third. And I had preeclampsia, and both Oliver and I nearly didn't make it. And that's quite possibly related to the alcohol use through my pregnancy. Oh, that certainly didn't help, and it wasn't something that I could wholeheartedly say it wasn't because of that.
Mm.
And it just turned into this, like my husband would come home, gin and tonic, followed by a bottle of wine, um, every day, plus maybe some binge drinking on the weekend with friends. Uh,
Yeah, we've talked about it before, haven't we? About the kind of, yeah, the English expat in France culture is really quite very booze heavy, very kind of it's almost like excuse I don't want to say excuses, it sounds shaming, but it almost like it's enables heavy drinkers, which I was one of them, to kind of assimilate into a culture which drinks all the time. But I mean, I haven't had a lot of experience with, I know you have, 'cause there's a lot more around where you live in France, but we went on holiday last year and it was this very strange kind of little pocket in the middle of France where there was, an English pub, and there was like this chateau that had been split into loads of gîtes, and few English people live there all year round, and then there was a few that kind of um and in some ways it was, really lovely. It was just like, oh wow, this is, so nice. And they kind of they put up this big sheet in the garden outside the chateau, and all the kids, like, watched films and stuff like that. But then all the adults just got absolutely trashed.
yeah.
Um, and I was like, oh my goodness, like if I'd have been involved in that, well, it would it I probably, my drinking would have hit an even darker level, maybe.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. Our friend Lindsay, who also lives in France, she sent me something the other day, and that was a fellow coach who started up
Mm.
specifically for expats. Uh,
Mm.
and there was a an incident down in the south of France, and I remember somebody commenting on the fact that her experience of expats in France is one of where expectations and reality don't actually meet, right? Like we come over here chasing this idyllic life, and that's not necessarily what we get. And we're quite isolated. We don't have the community that we had back in the UK. And I think I didn't realize how important that was for me, my husband, and my mum who moved over here. And so you put the depression, the isolation, and the permission to drink.
Mm.
And also, there's no sense of purpose quite often. At 27, I effectively semi-retired. I went from needing to work to pay my mortgage to coming out here and being very lucky to be mortgage free and to be a stay-at-home mum. But my sense of purpose kind of disappeared and my community disappeared. And
Mm.
so there are lots and lots of people who drink from the morning because
Mm.
the French drink. So, you'll see French in the bars in the morning, but they drink in a very, very different way.
Yeah.
I worked in a pub here. Interestingly, that was when I first stopped drinking. I think I had a 9-month stint of alcohol free. And that was we're working in the pub and seeing youngsters, French youngsters, come in and having three-quarters of their beer and leaving the other quarter. And I was like, what is this madness? You
Yeah.
know, yeah, I would never leave a drink, and I would never just have half a beer or yeah, if there's wine on the table, we would all finish. There was no way we would ever leave anything. So it
Mm.
is a different culture. But yeah, you're right. It enables the alcohol use over here, and
Yeah,
it's
we used to do that. What I used to do is I would go out with French people and I'd like watch what they drank and count that my drinks and stuff, like basically like keep a level on it, keep a level on it. Like, oh yes, I'm so sophisticated, just have one drink, blah, blah, blah. And then when I get home, then then I'd relax and just
yeah,
open the bottle and drink a bottle and be like, oh, because I could only keep up that pretense for,
yeah.
for
And
so long.
it's not actually very nice, is it?
No.
That's the irony is that we kind of say it's social drinking, but when we're looking at how, oh, okay, so what's acceptable when I'm around other people and why are these people not drinking as fast as I do? And why are they putting the cork back in the wine? Or like, this is crazy. God, even when I'm saying it, my shoulders are up and I'm kind of anxious about it. And so, yeah, it's not fun. And it was I had a certain amount of snobbery around I'm not the same as the expats, I'm different. But actually there was a family moved in and we got on really well and we just clicked in the way that we drank. Like it was I had three kids, they had two kids, and we enabled the hell out of each other. We went on holiday together, we did all these things. And I remember thinking like, when you're a mum and you've kind of lost your identity a bit, and the drinking helped me remember who I was.
Yeah.
And I loved it. Like it was party girl was out. That's what my nickname was. Yay, party girl's here. If it was like it's rose, it's 12 o'clock. Who wants some rose? And then I say I'm not religious, but there by the grace of God that nothing happened to the kids when we were day drinking. Um, and unfortunately, really for my husband, seeing he his journey was very different with alcohol. Like again, we moved over here genetically he had he had a family of history with mental health problems and we moved over here and I think there was just this kind of perfect storm of he stopped his sports because that wasn't available here. He didn't have his community. He struggled for work. He became a father of three. He already had a son in the UK. The isolation, the issues with other expats here, and all of that kind of led to depression and starting to self-medicate with alcohol and then weed. Like he started to grow it and would smoke it. And I could see that he was drinking in a very different way to me. I'm not saying that my drinking was disordered, right? Like, and it's only in working in this community that I realized just how disordered it was, and a lot of my other behaviors. His drinking is self-medication. I remember watching him like literally quench his thirst of he could have that, and I could see him sigh with relief at the way that he drank. And something in me was just like, I cannot tell him not to drink when I am totally enabling this because I'm always the leader and the motivator. Like, let's do more. This is brilliant. And this is not what he needs. It's the exact opposite of what he needs. And so I think that really impacted my decision to stop.
So yeah, tell me about that then. So what kind of led up to it? How did you do it? Yeah, tell me about that sort of the stop.
So at age 38. I mean, I'm an exercise physiologist. It's what I love. As I said, my dad died of heart disease when I was 19, and that really led me into that industry of well-being, of believing that we can contribute to our well-being in our lifestyle. So exercise, nutrition, and yoga. I was like those things and rest really, really, really interesting for me, and I have such a passion for them. So interestingly, never in that time did any of my studies lead to you should stop drinking. We used to recommend that people drink clear spirits and
Mm.
sodas to avoid the calories, but no one ever really mentioned the impact of alcohol on our peace of mind or our motivation to want to do good things for our well-being, the physiological impact, anything like that. Um, so I have always been kind of conscious about food, and I'm a nutritionist, so I did a lot of reading around it. And my ex-husband got diagnosed with ankylosing spondylitis, which is an autoimmune disease. Um, and me being me, I did a lot of reading around how nutrition can impact autoimmune, and it led me to the autoimmune paleo diet, which led me to the Whole30. Um, and through the reading, I remember not eating white flour, right? Like being so absolutely, they are poisoning us, they are doing this, they're doing that, they're feeding the masses, yada, yada, yada. And then starting to read about alcohol and starting to really open my eyes at the fact that this is a poison. I was so staunch in my, I will not eat flour, I won't have bread, I won't have pasta, but I will quite happily poison myself and sacrifice my food for this poison.
Mm. Yeah.
Uh, so I started doing kind of Whole30, took a break, but I didn't believe I had an issue with alcohol. I had a really strong belief that alcoholics looked a certain way and I did not fit that mold. Therefore, I did not need to give up alcohol. Yes, it was good for me to take breaks, but I would always go back to, but I'm okay to moderate. And
Yeah,
that
I mean, it's
lasted.
understandable too when you're living with someone that had such a kind of, obviously challenging relationship with alcohol to kind of be like, well, it doesn't look like that. And I think, that's for so many people where they get stuck is because they do have those people in their lives where it's like, well, I'm not that bad because it doesn't look like that. And yet it doesn't need to look like anything. It's how you feel about it and that relationship and all of that mental load that we're just talking about when you're like counting how many drinks other people, it's so exhausting, all of that control. Um, so yeah, I can see why you were thinking that, and that's why we encourage that curiosity, right? To just like, well, give it a go, give yourself a month, 3 months, and see what comes up.
Yeah,
Um, you know,
that's
you know.
it's like the comparison is a thief of joy, and it almost like comparison was the confirmation I needed that I was absolutely fine in my drinking.
Mhm.
And even with my husband, I've had people say, "Oh, but he's not a proper alcoholic, right?" And I'm like, "This guy has been now in detox, in and out of detox several times, has tried to take his life through drinking alcohol, and yet still there's the belief that he's not a proper alcoholic, and it's
Mhm.
okay, whatever it is, his relationship with alcohol impacts him in such a way that is detrimental to his health, his mental health, and his interpersonal relationships.
Yeah.
Um, and the more breaks that I took, the more benefits I saw in sobriety, the more the kind of the lenses came off around what alcohol was giving me or taking from me, and it certainly opened my eyes to his relationship with alcohol more so. Um, and yeah, I had a 9 month break, and I remember being so pleased with myself and saying to somebody who offered to buy me a drink in the pub, and I was like, "Oh, I don't drink, thank you." Um, and I can't remember why I started drinking again, but I was just like, "Oh, I will have one." And we talked about it earlier that your brain plays tricks on you, right? Like when we get so far in, it's like, but you don't really have a problem, and there's all that nostalgia, and I believe I can moderate, and for a while I probably could, but it would always lead back to the same of pretty much daily drinking. Um, I'm age 38, I had blood pressure issues. I was overweight. I had that kind of red tint. My doctor wanted to put me on meds. And I remember saying, absolutely not. No, thank you. I know from what I do that I can change this through lifestyle. And so, yeah, I did another Whole30, and not with the intention of stopping drinking. Just I got to the end of 30 days with the intention of going back to moderating once a month. But like you say, it takes up a huge amount of freaking headspace moderation.
Yeah,
Um,
it's always like now it's kind of like, just for a drink, like,
yeah,
there's so many other drinks to have. It's like, it's the epitome of having an issue with it, like, trying so hard to keep it in, you know, even if it's like once a month. It's just kind of like, what? Why?
yeah. And
Yeah,
those questions of actually, if I'm trying this hard
yeah,
to keep it in my lifestyle, despite how destructive it is to me,
yeah.
is that issue enough to say this has more control over me than I do over it?
Mm,
For somebody who's, I like to be control. We kind of talked about control last week and what that looks like, but I was like, no, it doesn't allow me the control that I want. So yeah, moderation, I tried all the moderation, right? However that looked, and I would always try and find a loophole, I think, as we do.
yeah.
Um, and so I stopped for 30 days. And I remember being stood in my bathroom thinking, I'm going to treat myself to a drink on the 1st of February. And I laughed, like literally laughed out loud and said, if I actually want to treat myself, it's not to have a drink. And I really do think our health and our time are the most precious commodities in the world. They are not a given. Um, and I was just like, I do not want to do something that is detrimental to my well-being, that I have control. I can say no, I can choose to say no to this. And no, other people are not going to understand why I'm not going to drink, but I'm just going to see where this goes. And that was, yeah, what, 6.5 years ago.
Yay! Whoop, whoop, whoop,
Yay!
whoop, whoop, whoop. Um, so I mean that's kind of why we started this podcast, is to talk about what happens after.
Yeah,
Da-da-da-da, and then surprise, life happens.
yeah,
The sort of multi-colored glory and difficulty that life being lifey can bring. So tell me, a little bit about what the last 6 years have been like, and more importantly, I suppose, what has helped you through and what you've learned about what recovery really looks like. That was about 16 questions in one. I wouldn't pass my coaching exam.
yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, let's take that. Let's break that down. I feel like the last 6 years are broken into the kind of three different sections for me anyway. I feel like the first 2 years of sobriety looked very different to the next 2 years, to the next 2 years. And in the first 2 years, I was definitely riding that pink cloud of sobriety. And I realized kind of quickly, because I had that 9 month break, but then it took me another 5 years of
Mm,
moderate before I managed
wow.
to
Okay. Mm,
convince myself to see where it could go. So I knew that something needed to be different this time. Um, and so I got in touch with Simon, actually. Simon Chappell, who I knew through the gym. Him and I used to be great friends when I ran the gym. He was completely out and proud with his sobriety. And I was like, oh, hey, I'm 5 months sober. And he was like, you should join this and you should do this. And he was on about, yeah, you should become a coach. And I was like, what is that? That's a made up job, right? Uh, and it opened my eyes to the community that was there alongside AA.
mhm,
And I suddenly realized the importance of community in sustaining my sobriety. So that was really early, like not only community, but trying to live this whole life, because when I first gave up, it did feel like there was a void. There was a time void, if nothing else, and there was a mental void, if nothing else. Like, okay, so what do I do with my evenings, and how do I keep my brain active? Because alcohol's just this passive way of numbing out and passing the time.
mm.
So that looked like me joining every club I possibly could, doing everything to excess, strangely, um, and being really smug about it and
Mm.
being like, this is what sobriety looks like. Weight loss, like great skiing, great sleep, da 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 da. And I was the poster girl for sobriety. And then my life completely fell apart. And I was like, yeah, um, my sobriety became something that was totally different. Um, I feel a little bit emotional. My sobriety at that point was my anchor. Like my husband's mental health took a complete dive. I had other behaviors alongside this that at the moment I'm not going to talk about, but maybe one day, um, that I am not proud of, that didn't help the situation. But ultimately, his mental health took a real turn, and our idyllic life in France, with our kids became dealing with somebody with serious mental health in the best way that I knew, which wasn't a great way, to be honest, and trying to rescue him, trying to control the situation, trying to do all these things I didn't have the skill to do, and not the compassion to myself either of realizing that. Um, and yeah, and kind of came to a crisis point, of him trying to take his own life for the first time, having moved house into this renovation project. And so my sobriety at that point, yeah, absolutely was my anchor, and it kept me and my kids safe because I just absolutely thank whatever is up there that I had the capacity to deal with what came at me at that point.
Mm.
Um, and I know it would have been completely different had I been drinking. And he was in and out of psych unit and still is, but for the year until I made the decision that he could not come back to our house. Um, which after 20, well, we married 20 years that year. We'd been together for 25 years, and really, you know, yeah, my relationship with alcohol, my relationship with him, it was all intertwined. And um, yeah, and that was really difficult. I went from being the poster girl of what sobriety could give you to realizing that uh, sobriety is a lifesaver, and that alcohol, whilst my relationship with it was kind of like it was great and it's fun, it is also killing families, it's killing people. It's solidified for me why alcohol is so dangerous. I saw him on the brink in a coma from drinking a litre of vodka, going into organ failure. So yes, I thank goodness for my sobriety at that point. And then the last 2 years have been about rest and recovery, really, I would say.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's interesting that like being the poster girl of sobriety, you have to look a certain way, right? And it's like the testament of sobriety is being able to, hold through those hard times. And, you know, I mean, knowing you through all those times is, just incredible resilience. Incredible. I mean, resilience is, we could do an episode on that word because it
Yeah. I
brings up a lot. Yeah.
I hated that word for a
Yeah,
long
same.
time. Like, I don't want to be fucking resilient. Like,
Yeah. I want someone to take care of me. I was
yeah,
coming out of a psychiatrist appointment and they were like, "You're incredibly resilient." And I was just like, "Fuck you."
yeah,
But now, in our wise old age
yeah.
of resilience, because we've been battered around quite a bit, we're like, damn, we're resilient and we're proud of it. But yeah, I guess like there is an element of this, right? And I think we'll talk about this in in times to come, but that recovery is a big sort of wide ranging, there's lots of elements of what keeps us well, right? And there's lots of elements of things that harm us. And sometimes we turn to things that might not be as damaging as something else, but help us through those moments. And I think that's been a huge kind of learning for me in terms of my own compassion for myself, and I know for you, that like, I mean, Lula Benz, who was my trauma, teacher, who I did a lot of learning with her. She would always say, look, when someone is in crisis, it's like they are, out to sea
Mm.
with no dry land, no land in sight, right? And so all of the things that they have learned over the years, be they maladaptive or very, good for them in abbreviated comments, all the things they've learned or is this life jacket holding them up
Yeah.
from drowning, and so it would be very, very dangerous to expect that person to shed all of that before they're on dry land, so that dry land looks like, grounding, community, rest, restoration, all of those things. If you're looking at the Maslow hierarchy of needs, those that the bottom of the triangle, those, basic needs being met, to have any expectation as a outside person looking in and as an inside person looking out, because we have so much self-judgment, to have that expectation that we can shed all of those things. Um, and so, yes, little by little, and that's why it's so difficult at the moment because mental health services, trauma services, addiction services, they all sit separately.
Yeah.
Like you can't have one without the other. You can't, and that's obviously what you learn a lot with your husband, right? And that's why, there's the French have got a long way to go to understand how to take care of people
Yeah.
because there's this expectation of like, well, you need to be abstinent before you can do this, or
Yeah.
and it just it's not that it's
Black and white.
yeah, it's not that black and
Yeah.
white. Um, so, I think what I've seen, the testament to your sobriety and the anchor that you had was that you essentially put that anchor in the ground and said, right, that is the non-negotiable, right?
Yeah.
And then around that, it was almost the kids, you know, and then rest. If I could imagine the kind of, the circles around the things that you put in place, that was kind of the central. So it's like, right, the sobriety, the kids' safety, and then rest. So tell me a little bit about that, what that rest gave you and why it was needed, and then a little bit about what it looks like today.
So the rest was actually incredibly hard to lean into. Um, for somebody who is, for somebody that probably didn't appreciate um, how, of switching that narrative to have I done enough to rest, to have I rested enough to do things.
Mm.
Like I really, really try and now prioritize. And yeah, working with other people, I feel like my experiences has given me far more compassion for it's not just a case of you need to go do yoga, you need to take yourself on a walk, you need to do these things. Um, because I did, yeah, you're right. There was my non-negotiable of sobriety. There was making sure my kids were alive, which was incredibly difficult because I wasn't showing up as the mum that I wanted to for them because I was going through my own depression and my own kind of um just like stunned of this distraction that had happened. And don't get me wrong, I pushed a lot for that distraction because I didn't when I got sober, I realized how dysfunctional things were. And so I pushed things to a crisis point so that there could be a change. I had my own role in that. Um, but I had to get the house sorted to provide that base need for my kids. Um, and then I was working out. I used to work out with personal trainer, and as I said, I was at my fittest. I was really, really happy with who I was, my being in my own skin and how I looked. But and I was working out with my personal trainer one day, and I passed out. And he knew what was going on in my life. And it's interesting now as a personal trainer of taking in that element of trauma and that element of stress resilience, like what else is going on in the background? How do we adapt our movement according to that, not just one size fits all with regards to movement. And I realized at that point when I passed out that my body was going to make me stop and rest. Um, and I, as somebody who'd never ever experienced depression, I just had extreme fatigue, right? Like for 2 years, I gave myself permission to just stop, um, do the bare minimum, um, and otherwise just stop. So it looked like giving up yoga. The idea of getting out of the house, of driving to my yoga class, of parking, took away any benefit of the yoga session. It looked like early nights. It looked like lots of crying. It looked like kind of working through that of all those feelings that came up during that time. And knowing that by doing that, I was healing myself. And it's difficult, right? Because in those 2 years, I gained all the weight plus more. I didn't look how I wanted to look. It felt almost too, I felt that it looked like to the outside world that I wasn't winning at life in sobriety, whereas I knew that that was the exact opposite. By being sober, I was in tune enough with my body and my mind to say, the only thing I can do at the moment is to rest on that land.
Mhm.
And I cannot thrive. And I would have lots of people saying, you should do this, you should do that. And I knew in my heart of hearts that I could not. I love that analogy of the out at sea and the being on land. I was like, I just need solid ground and I need to rest here for a while before I can do anything else. Um, and so I did. And it took a good 2.5 years of looking like that, of just doing the bare minimum to get through life before feeling like I could take things on again.
I mean, I must say you ran a business and like, and did retreats and, had
Yeah,
like cooked lots of meals and, like,
yeah. It was my bare minimum. It was
yeah, yeah,
like, okay, I have to. It's an interesting one, right? I had to suddenly show up as provider for the kids. I
yeah.
had to pay my bills. I had to do those things. Um, I didn't want to lose myself completely as well in it. Uh, but there was just, I mean, the extreme fatigue is
Yeah.
in terms of stress resilience, we talk about it. There's a sweet spot of stress, and when you go over that, it comes up as distress, dysfunction, disease. And mine was just, yeah, I could not move, I could not exercise, I could not deal with anything more. And I held on to my sobriety like it never ever crossed my mind to want a drink in that whole time. If anyone brought it up, it was like, God, thank goodness I don't drink.
Yeah. Yeah. And so where are you, where are you now? And what is your kind of hopes for, the next 2 years, the next 4 years? Let's go up to year 10.
Well, it's interesting, right? Because I run the community, which I feel keeps me strong in my sobriety. Um, it's an interesting dynamic, because it's the dynamics of people. Um, I am in a new relationship, and that in itself is quite interesting.
What's
Sobriety.
his name?
His name's McDreamy, and that's all we're going to call him. And it's it's interesting. It's looking at that idea of what's a dry drunk, and like I do my version of the work whilst I don't do AA. I very much know that just removing alcohol is not enough to keep me sober. I have to do the work. And that is, yeah, it's environmental, it's psychological, it's physiological, it's all those things. Um, and I I keep on stay like renewing the vows of my sobriety. Why do I stay sober? I still have nostalgia kicks in. I still have like, is this forever? I really need to do this. And then
Even though I said up to 10 years, I was like, oh, that's like a weird question because it's like, let's just do 24 hours, right? So
yeah, yeah,
what do you hope for the next 24 hours for
yeah.
yourself?
It is. And the reason we started this podcast is like, what does long term, but how do we keep grounded in that? And we've known people who've been 5, 6, 7 years who have gone back to the idea of moderation or drinking and seeing like I know in my heart of hearts that that's not for me, but my brain still plays tricks on me. So what I'm always interested in, what does it look like to keep my sobriety solid, and just coming to a place of acceptance. And I love this word surrender. I surrender to the idea that this is something that I will always need to prioritize because it impacts all the things that keep me well. So I hope in the next 2 years, I continue with my learning. I continue with building new relationships. I continue with being grounded in my sobriety. Um,
And I'd say you're in terms of kind of coming out of rest, you know, your your level of kind of fitness and activity is now kind of stabilizing at what you how it feels good for you.
yeah,
Um, and what have been some of the, I mean, I'm conscious of the time, so we said we wouldn't do these too long. But it was always going to be long when it's someone's whole life story.
yeah,
Um, what are the kind of, I guess, 4 or 5 things for you that feel like, fundamental pillars to your sobriety, your continued sobriety, your sustainability? Like what are the things where you think, right, this is when I know that I'm doing my work.
yeah. So, I mean, I always like to stay grounded in the very pragmatic. I'm quite scientific in that, like the pragmatic facts around alcohol and physiologically how that would impact me if I drink. Um, I wear a Whoop watch, which I love. I'm a real data kind of geek. So I love to see the impact of my diet, my exercise on my heart rate variability, my resting heart rate, my blood pressure. I, my dad was 63, his mother was 63, his sister was 59 when they died, and I want to live well for as long as I possibly can. I want to be functionally fit, and sobriety is at the core of that. So, the non-negotiables are always kind of doing the reading around it, looking at the facts around it, and staying interested
Mm.
in that. It is in prioritizing rest because fatigue, no good decision comes when we're fatigued. I think everything seems. Why are you laughing?
I was like, yes, so it's just my whole life has been very fatigued. So it's like, yeah.
And it's true, right? Like the brain is not at its best when it's
Yeah.
fatigued. Um, Everything seems bigger, everything seems more difficult. So it's listening to myself, knowing when I need rest. And I do love the data because it gives me permission to move. It gives me permission to rest, which is quite nice. Um, because sometimes I need that. And my continued learning has been looking at my behaviors, like looking at how I use food, how I use shopping, how I use validation, those kinds of things. So just being aware of actually consistency and we talk about that pendulum, like the the swing of the pendulum. I want it to be quite balanced because that's where I'm at my best. So trying to keep things more balanced and living a life that's aligned with my kind of values, whatever that looks like. And I know I remember like we were talking about Brett, I remember you saying to me when I was like, there's no way forward here. It's a lose-lose situation. And you saying what lets you lose yourself the least. Um, and like I still go back to that. Sometimes it feels like it's a no-win
Mm.
situation. But how can I navigate life in the way that lets me lose myself the least? So that's what keeps me strong in my sobriety, I think, and that's the work and connection with cool people that make me
I was
laugh.
going to say like me, and then you were like, "It's cool
Cool
people."
people. Not
Um, not amazing. Yeah, and being silly. God,
yeah,
yeah.
doing things for fun. It's part of like compassion focused therapy, right? Is go have fun, do stupid shit, and laugh at yourself. Uh,
Mm, yeah, love that.
yeah.
Well, thank you so much for like sharing your story and yeah, opening up and being vulnerable and it helps me, it helps people listening to hear such a brave, courageous person, who's is just it's really inspiring. So I really appreciate that. Let's wrap it up and say goodbye. And
Next week is your story.
it is that old chestnut.
That old chestnut, and we get to
We've got a few new dips and
yeah, yeah, right.
yeah.
That's it. What doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Hate that. But yeah, no, thank you. It's been nice to share my story.
Take care. Thanks so much. Bye bye.